Welcome, today's story is full of drama. Like and subscribe to stay updated. Let's get started.
The course of my life seemed clearly laid out, a meticulously planned journey with little room for unexpected detours. I held a secure role as the executive editor of a well-regarded newspaper, the Northeast Times, a position I poured my heart into. My wife, Emily Grant, thrived as a senior vice president at her publishing house, Pearl Horizon Publishing. Together, we had constructed what looked like an ideal existence: a strong marriage, 2 grown children in college, and financial stability. On the surface, it all seemed flawless, yet beneath this polished facade, fractures were beginning to emerge. Subtle signs I failed to recognize until it was too late. What lay ahead would dismantle everything I thought I knew, unraveling the life I had worked so hard to build and forcing me to face painful realities about love, trust, and vulnerability. I am Jonathan Hayes, married to Emily Hayes. As the executive editor of the Northeast Times, my career has been my life's focus, while Emily has excelled as a senior vice president at Pearl Horizon Publishing. We have 2 children: Matthew, 22, studying global economics at State University of New York, and Laura, 20, attending Pacific University in California. Both of us have built successful careers, with Emily earning slightly more than I do. By all appearances, we were content, or so I believed. We had planned a special evening together, attending a gala to cap off what had been an especially trying week for Emily. She had been anticipating the event, and I was eager to watch her unwind and savor the night. She wore a stunning new black dress, strapless, backless, hemmed a few inches above the knee, with a subtle slit that added just a hint of intrigue. Her look was completed with the diamond necklace I had gifted her for our 25th anniversary, her cherished sapphire earrings, and a replica of a classic antique ring. Emily's blonde hair was swept up in an elegant updo, radiating sophistication, and she looked absolutely radiant. As for me, I had chosen my tuxedo, a classic and effortless choice that required little thought. At the event, Emily stood about 10 feet away, leaning casually against a faux fireplace, champagne flute in hand, laughing with the carefree air of a college student. That part didn't bother me. It was the man she was talking to that set me on edge. He had a slick, self-satisfied grin and a demeanor I immediately disliked. His hand lingered on her arm and shoulder as he leaned in to whisper something in her ear, and she nodded in agreement, her smile unwavering. That was enough. I decided it was time to step in and extract her from the situation. But as I moved forward, a gentle hand caught my arm. "Don't do anything," said a calm voice. I turned to see a striking brunette standing beside me. "My wife is getting drawn in by him, and his friends are watching you," she added, her tone low but firm. She subtly motioned toward a rugged-looking man about 15 feet away. His piercing gaze locked onto me. Then she gestured toward the balcony doors, where another man stood scanning the crowd. "He's planning to lead her out to the balcony and make his move," she said calmly. "He'll likely try to get too close, touch her inappropriately. That's his usual approach. If your wife doesn't respond, he'll move on to someone else. He rarely misses his target. No offense," she added with a faint shrug. I turned back to see Emily still smiling as she followed the man, Ethan Marks, toward the balcony. They stepped outside, and I noticed his 2 associates quietly shutting the doors behind them, positioning themselves nearby like sentries. I glanced at the woman beside me, who sipped her whiskey sour with a somber expression. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "And how do you know all this?" She hesitated for a moment, then answered quietly, "That was me, 7 years ago." Her words startled me. Intrigued, I listened as she turned me slightly so my back was to the balcony doors, shielding me from the sight of Emily stepping out. "My name is Natalie Harper," she began, her voice steady but tinged with regret. "7 years ago, I was here at this very gala with my husband. We were supporting a children's charity and having a great time. We'd even planned to make a sizable donation. Then he approached me. He was charming, magnetic in a way I couldn't explain. Before I knew it, he was touching my back and suggesting we step outside for some air. I was drawn in by his confidence, his charm, and I followed him to the balcony. Out there, things escalated quickly. He touched my chest, asking if I liked it, his words teasing me in a way that left me both flustered and intrigued. He pushed boundaries just enough to leave me breathless. Then, before I could even process what was happening, he slid his hand under my dress and into my underwear. Everything happened so fast. I reached my peak almost instantly, she admitted, her voice faltering. And then he made his proposal. He wanted me to spend the weekend with him, promising it would be an unforgettable experience. Just one time, and then I'd go back to my life as if nothing had happened. I went back to my husband and told him outright that I'd be leaving for the weekend with this man. She paused, exhaling shakily. My husband just stood there silently, watching as I walked out with him. I was stunned but stayed quiet, letting her continue. That weekend changed everything, Natalie said, her voice thick with emotion. When I came back, my husband couldn't even look at me. I tried to reassure him, to tell him we could get through it, but something had broken between us. He couldn't be close to me anymore. We drifted apart. I started seeking casual encounters at night, trying to fill the void, while he became more and more withdrawn. His work as an accountant suffered, and eventually he lost his job. One night, I came home and found him in the basement. Her voice cracked slightly. After that, I spent 7 months in psychiatric therapy. My 3 kids, 14, 12, and 10 at the time, stopped speaking to me. Someone must have told them what I'd done. My parents ended up filing for custody. I still had visitation rights, but it wasn't the same. Natalie stared into her glass, her expression a mixture of sadness and resignation. I lost everything because I let him pull me in. I thought you should know what kind of man you're dealing with. I didn't fully understand what my kids were doing at the time, but when they were old enough, they filed for emancipation and cut off all contact with me. She glanced at her watch. It took him about 15 minutes to change me. He's been out there about 12 now. Then she turned to me and instructed, "Don't turn around. Don't acknowledge them. Ignore them. If she tries to talk to you, don't look at her. She might say she has something important to tell you. If she does, respond however you want, and then we'll leave together. It'll unsettle him, and it might give her pause. This might be the only satisfaction you'll get, at least for now. Afterward, we'll go somewhere to relax and talk. Can you handle that?" I nodded, staying alert. Moments later, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. Emily placed her hand on my upper left arm and began, "Jonathan, there's something I need to tell you." I shook her off and snapped over my shoulder, "Stay away from me. You're nothing but trouble. Say what you need to, but if you don't come home tonight, don't bother coming back. We're done, and I'll make sure you regret it. You've got more to lose than I do." With that, I gestured toward Natalie, and we left. "Jonathan, we need to talk right now," Emily called after me, but I kept walking. The atmosphere in the room had settled, and people instinctively stepped aside as we moved toward the exit. "How did you get here?" I asked Natalie. "Car service," she replied. "Allow me, ma'am," I offered as I waved for my car. A valet brought my Cadillac XT6 around to the front, and a young man opened the door for her. She got in, and after tipping him, I slid into the driver's seat. "I know a quiet place where we can talk. Does that work for you?" I asked. "Perfect, Jonathan. I could use a drink," she said with a faint smile. We headed to the Lantern, a relaxed spot with a mostly older crowd. After parking, we found a secluded table in the back and ordered drinks and appetizers. As she finished sharing the rest of her story, I opened up about Emily and me. I told her Emily had been a college professor who faced a major career setback when scandalous news surfaced. I also mentioned that I was the executive editor at the Northeast Times, with 6 years in the Air Force Special Operations and nearly 20 years as a journalist. I told her about our 2 kids, Matthew and Laura, both away at college. "So, what's your plan?" Natalie asked. "Plan?" I said, shaking my head. "I can't even wrap my head around my feelings, let alone figure out what to do. If she's not there when I get home, it's time for drastic measures. She'll pay, and so will he." I paused, my emotions welling up. My voice broke, and tears started flowing. Natalie reached across the table and took my hand, her eyes filled with deep empathy, as though the weight of the world had crumbled for both of us. I looked at her and realized that, if I wanted, I could find comfort here, but I couldn't, not if there was even a shred of hope for reconciliation. "Look, I'm sorry, but rebound closeness isn't my thing," I said gently. "I need to go home and face this. Please share your contact details so we can stay in touch, maybe talk through this. I'll need that guy's name to start planning his downfall." Natalie nodded, took my phone, and entered her full name, Natalie Harper, along with her phone number and address. "Jonathan, you're a good man. You didn't deserve this," she said softly. "I hoped for something more, but I respect your choice. Go home and try to work things out. Best of luck." I settled the bill and we headed out. After dropping her off at her townhouse, I watched as she went inside. Then I drove home, my mind spinning. As I stepped through the door, I immediately noticed Emily wasn't there. All right, she's made her choice. It was 12:39 a.m. when I picked up my cell and called my best friend, Eric Marshall. Eric, who was also my attorney, had served with me in the Air Force. We often joked about how he'd gone on to be a lawyer while I had gotten a respectable job. A groggy voice answered. "Hello? Jonathan, what's going on? It's almost 1 a.m. Are you all right?" "No, Eric, it's not all right," I replied firmly. "I need you here at 10 a.m. tomorrow, ready to get into lawyer mode, and maybe even best friend mode. I'm filing for divorce." That woke him up. I heard his wife in the background asking what was going on. Eric responded to her, "It's Jonathan. We've got a problem. You went to that event, right? Emily met Ethan Marks there, didn't she?" "Oh man," he sighed. "You had no idea, did you? Just make sure you're here, Eric. For me." "No problem," he assured me. "I'll be there." After the call, I started making a list. First, I looked up a bonded locksmith and jotted down their contact information. Then I found a site that buys cars for cash, provided the title is clear. The Lexus ES I had bought for Emily's 20th anniversary gift was in my name, so I noted their details. Next, I packed 2 small overnight bags with essentials, underwear, clothes, and shoes, and left them by the front door before heading to bed. At 7 a.m., I woke up, made coffee, and checked my computer for updates from the newsroom. I noticed Brian Scott, one of our investigative reporters, was online. I called him and asked if he could discreetly dig up everything he could find on someone named Ethan Marks. "No problem, boss. I'll get right on it," Brian replied. Still no sign of my soon-to-be ex-wife. As 10 a.m. approached, I was feeling worse. I called the car buyer and explained I had a Lexus ES with a clear title and valid registration for sale. "What's the model?" the man asked. After I told him, he quoted a price. "A 3-year-old Lexus, huh? How about $19,000? He sounded surprised, maybe even suspicious. "It's not stolen," I assured him, "but you'll need to pick it up." After giving him the address, he promised to be there in 25 minutes. "Don't sell it to anyone else." "I'll be there," he said before hanging up. 10 minutes later, just after I finished speaking with the locksmith, Eric arrived with his paralegal, Amy Walters. We went inside, and I served them coffee and bagels. About 20 minutes later, Andy from the car service showed up. I showed him the Lexus along with the registration and title. "Anything wrong with it?" he asked. "No, it's in great shape. I just don't need it anymore," I replied. "Divorce?" he guessed, grinning. "Glad you're not divorcing me." His team had a flatbed tow truck ready. I signed all the paperwork, and Andy paid me before they took the car away. He shook my hand and wished me luck before leaving. Still no sign of my unfaithful wife. Back inside, Eric and his legal team were hard at work in the dining room. The divorce papers were finalized, and they had also prepared a restraining order and started drafting a suit for alienation of affection. Eric glanced up and asked, "What about the car?" "I sold it," I explained. "I don't need it anymore." "You didn't do anything illegal," Eric said with a smirk. "A bit sneaky, sure, but I like it." For the next 45 minutes, we tackled the financial side of things: banks, investment accounts, insurance, cell phones, mortgages, and my pensions. By noon, Emily still hadn't returned. The locksmith had finished changing all the locks and installed keyless deadbolts on every door. We decided to have lunch at Hearthstone Grill, where Eric's wife, Sarah, joined us. She greeted me with a warm, supportive hug. At the table, Sarah studied me, clearly waiting for me to share what was on my mind. Eventually, she broke the silence, gently asking, "What happened? And what do you plan to do next?" "All I did was trust my wife," I said, my voice heavy with emotion. "She blindsided me, and now I'm just trying to process it all." Sarah nodded empathetically. "Do you think it can ever be fixed?" "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "She still hasn't come back, and honestly, I'm lost. The only way out of this mess might be if she just disappeared entirely." Sarah gave me an understanding look, shaking her head slightly. I can't imagine why Emily would do this. We spent a long time talking, processing the situation together. Afterward, we returned home. By 6 p.m., I was back at my house, still alone. Still no sign of Emily. Exhausted, I grabbed a beer and fell asleep in my recliner. The next morning, I woke up groggy and sore at 7 a.m. After shuffling to the shower and cleaning up, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to church. Sitting quietly in the back pew, I prayed for guidance. But as I sat there, it felt like my prayers were met with silence. Even after Mass, I lingered, hoping for some kind of sign. None came. It seemed I was on my own in this. I drove home, grabbed a coffee at a fast food drive-thru, and parked my Cadillac in the garage next to my 1980 Ford Bronco. With the weather changing, I'd soon be driving the Bronco daily. After locking up the garage, I turned on the TV to watch the Giants-Ravens game, but true to form, the Giants lost. Seemed fitting, given my streak of bad luck lately. At 5:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Emily on my way. Be home in 20 minutes. I stared at the message, knowing that with the restraining order about to take effect, things were about to get intense. Exactly 20 minutes later, I heard the rumble of an unfamiliar car pulling into the driveway. Peeking out the window, I saw a sleek European sedan. Emily stepped out of the passenger seat, leaned into the car, and kissed someone. Likely Ethan Marks before he drove off. She then walked up to the house, confused when her keys didn't work in the new locks. Her eyes darted to the two small overnight bags sitting by the door. What's going on? She muttered to herself before ringing the doorbell repeatedly. She started pounding on the door and yelling for me to open it. Jonathan, open the door. Finally, I went to the door. Emily was furious, glaring at me as she demanded an explanation. It's simple, Emily, I said calmly. Your keys don't work because you don't live here anymore. The woman I was married to used to live here, but she's gone now. Her eyes widened, and she leaned in, trying to kiss me. Honey, she started. Don't even try. I cut her off. I have no idea where that mouth has been or who it's been on. Tell me, how many times did you sleep with him or do other things? What we had wasn't just intimacy. It was special. Emily flinched, stammering. At least I kept my wedding rings on, she muttered defensively. Oh, spare me, I said sharply. You disappeared for 2 full days without a single call. I doubt you even thought about me. I glanced at her hands. Speaking of rings, those were gifts, so they're yours. But the engagement ring, that was my grandmother's. Remember when I proposed? You won't be needing it anymore. Her face crumpled as she started to cry, trembling. Why are you doing this? She choked out. It was just an experience. I had a right to it. You don't own me. Her confidence seemed to return as she straightened up. You need to swallow your pride, Jonathan. We both need to move on. You're right about that, I said. And I'm already doing it. I handed her an envelope. This is for you. She opened it, looking confused. What's this? She asked. Money. I sold the Lexus. I didn't need it anymore since I didn't have a wife to drive it. Her face twisted in shock. What did you do with my car? She demanded. It wasn't your car, I replied. I bought it for you, but it was in my name. So I sold it. I thought giving you the money would be a fair gesture. That's all of it. She counted the cash quickly. $19,000? That car was worth way more. What's going on? That's all it was worth. Much like our marriage after Friday night, I said coldly. The shock was evident on her face as she began protesting. How could you be so heartless? I came back to you. I couldn't help but notice her bare right hand. Where's the ring, Emily? The one you insisted on having. I offered to get you an authentic replica, but you demanded that knockoff I bought just to make you happy. Where is it? Her face turned pale and she stammered. He wanted a memento from our weekend. She finally murmured, avoiding my gaze. So, you didn't just give him yourself. You also gave away the ring you claimed to treasure. She blushed deeply and gave a small nod. I glanced at my watch. 6:03 p.m. Get out, Emily. We're done. No, I want to come inside. This is my home, she protested. Not anymore, it isn't. I slammed the door shut and bolted it, leaning against the heavy oak as tears welled up in my eyes and the pain set in. Outside, she continued ringing the doorbell, pounding on the door, and shouting for me to let her in. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "What's your emergency? Police, fire, or medical?" the dispatcher asked. "I have a restraining order against my soon-to-be ex-wife. She's outside yelling and causing a disturbance. Please send someone quickly." Moments later, I watched as 2 police cars pulled into the driveway, lights flashing. 4 officers approached Emily while 2 came to my door. I handed them a copy of the restraining order, which they verified with the station, and provided her copy, requesting they handle the situation quietly. Meanwhile, Emily was informed of the restraining order. As the officers spoke to her, she shouted back at me, "Where am I supposed to go?" "Go to hell, Emily." "I couldn't care less," I replied, my voice icy. The officers instructed her to leave and escorted her, along with her bags, to the curb. She called an Uber, apologizing profusely to the officers as she directed the driver to take her to the Astoria Grand Hotel. Once she climbed in, the car drove off. At Astoria Grand Hotel, Emily arrived at her suite on the 12th floor. Her executive assistant, Rachel Carter, was already waiting for her, clearly anxious. "You're 30 minutes late," Rachel said, following her into the room. Emily sighed, putting her bag down. "What's going on?" Rachel hesitated, then blurted, "Is it true?" Emily turned to face her, startled. "What are you talking about?" Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper. "Everyone's talking about you and Jonathan and the gala on Friday night." Emily sank into her chair, suddenly on edge. "Yes, we went to the gala, but I'm not sure what you mean." Rachel looked at her with disbelief. "You left with that guy, the creep, and left Jonathan there." "Oh my God, Emily!" Rachel slumped into a chair, covering her face in her hands as tears began to flow. Emily, stunned by her assistant's reaction, stared at her in silence. "How do you even know about that?" "I haven't told anyone." "Who else knows?" "Everyone knows, you fool. It's all over the company, and it's not even 11 a.m. yet," Rachel said through sobs. Emily's face went pale as the weight of the revelation hit her. Just then, her boss, Diane Holloway, burst into the room, her expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Oh my goodness, it's true," Diane exclaimed, looking between the 2 women. Emily froze, her mind racing. Everything was spiraling out of control. Defensively, Emily said, "I think this is being blown way out of proportion." "Oh, really?" Diane replied with a smirk. "Do you even know who he is? How do you think the whole city, and maybe half the Northeast, already knows?" Emily turned pale, staring at her hands. "What did Jonathan tell you?" "He said you ruined him like you ruined yourself," Diane said sharply. "Who does he think he is?" "He doesn't control my life," Emily snapped. Diane narrowed her eyes. "He's your husband, you fool. What did Jonathan do when you got back on Sunday?" Emily glanced down at her desk, sniffling. "He sold my car," she said quietly. "Said he didn't need it anymore since he didn't have a wife to drive it." "Oh my goodness!" Diane exclaimed, shaking her head in disbelief. At that moment, the door flew open and Victoria Hayes, Vice President of Acquisitions at Aurora Bank, stormed in, followed closely by Emily's secretary, Angela Lynn. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes," Angela said, out of breath. "She just walked in." "It's all right, Angela," Emily said with a hint of sarcasm. "Come on in, Victoria." "What on earth have you done?" Victoria demanded. "Before you respond, just know it's not about your work. It's about the mess you've made of your life." Before Emily could respond, Diane's phone rang. She picked it up. "Hello?" "Yes, Hank. I'm with her now." "No, we haven't heard anything from him yet. I'm just getting the details." "Yes, dear. I'll let you know as soon as I find out. Goodbye." She hung up the phone and turned to Emily. "That was my husband. He wants to know if you've heard from Jonathan today." "No, I haven't spoken to him since last night," Emily replied. She grabbed her phone and dialed Jonathan's number. The phone beeped twice before a recorded message announced her service had been disconnected. She stared at the device as though it were toxic. "He cut off my phone," she murmured. Diane sighed deeply. "Oh, this is bad, very bad." Just then, Angela re-entered. "A young woman is urgently requesting to see you," she said. "It's about your marriage." A tense silence filled the room. "Send her in," Emily said reluctantly. A tall blonde woman, dressed in a navy skirt, ivory blouse, 3-inch heels, and a matching blazer, entered the office holding a small briefcase. She approached Emily's desk, glancing around the room before fixing her gaze on her. "Are you Mrs. Emily Hayes?" "At least for now," Victoria interjected coldly. "Listen here, lady. Who do you think you are?" Emily raised a hand to stop her. "Yes, I'm Jonathan Hayes' wife. Do you have something for me?" she asked, dreading the answer. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hayes. You've been served," the woman said, handing her a large envelope. She snapped a quick photo for proof and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and looked back. 7 years ago, my mother tore our family apart just like you did. I hope it was worth it. Good day." Emily dropped her head onto the desk, gripping the envelope tightly as tears streamed down her face. Diane rushed over, helping her sit up as she began to hyperventilate. Meanwhile, Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Hudson Ledger, Mr. Hayes' office. How may I assist you?" A professional voice answered. "I need to speak with Mr. Hayes." "This is Victoria Hayes from Aurora Bank," Victoria said curtly. "May I ask what this is regarding, ma'am?" "It's about his wife," Victoria replied coldly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but Mr. Hayes isn't accepting calls from his wife," the assistant said. "Just put him on the phone," Victoria snapped. "One moment, please." A few seconds later, Jonathan's voice came through the speaker. "Well, Victoria, I assume the whole crowd is gathered around Emily. Let me guess Rachel and Diane are there too, along with the Queen of Fidelity herself. What do you want?" "This is extreme, Jonathan. She's in pieces and you're not helping. What's your plan here?" "Ask her what she expected to happen when she left for her special weekend. Then tell her to get a lawyer and talk to them. I won't speak to her until we sit down with the kids on Saturday. Goodbye." The line went dead with a decisive click. "Oh no," Diane whispered, her face pale. "You're in serious trouble." "Well," Victoria replied dryly, "your only option is to lay it all out and beg for mercy." "Oh wait, you already did that this weekend, didn't you?" Emily's head hit her desk with a dull thud, the sound echoing through the office. No one moved to help her. Meanwhile, Jonathan ended the call with Victoria and dialed his son in New Jersey. Matthew was in a committed relationship, and Jonathan could only hope this situation wouldn't affect that. The family needed to talk. After 3 rings, his son answered. "Hey, Dad, what's up?" "Not great, son. How's Kara?" "She's good." "Dad, what's going on? Is Mom okay?" "She's physically fine," Jonathan replied. "But I need you and your sister here for a family meeting on Saturday. Kara's welcome to come too. 2 tickets will be waiting for you at the counter on Friday. I'll have my assistant send you the details. Don't ask questions, just be here. It's important." "Dad, you're really scaring me. What's going on?" "Son, I haven't spoken to you like this in over 10 years, but I need you to trust me now. Just come, don't ask questions." Jonathan hung up, deciding he wouldn't try to influence his children's views on their mother. He would let them draw their own conclusions. His conversation with his daughter, Laura, went similarly, though she sounded more emotional. Despite this, she also agreed to meet him on Saturday. The rest of Jonathan's day passed quietly. He consulted his lawyer and updated his private investigator on any developments regarding Ethan Marks. Meanwhile, at Pearl Horizon Publishing, Emily's friends gathered around her as she sat overwhelmed, sobbing uncontrollably. "What have I done? What have I done?" Emily cried, barely able to process reality. Finally, Diane stepped up. "We need to pull it together and find a way to even things out." She pulled out her phone and made a call. "Hey Lisa, it's Diane Holloway. Can you take on a friend of mine for a divorce case? Her name is Emily Hayes." There was a pause as Diane listened to the response. "Yes, her husband is Jonathan Hayes." "Wait, what? I see. Thanks anyway." She ended the call and turned to the group. "What was that about?" someone asked. "She's already being seen as toxic," Diane replied, her voice heavy. "That was Lisa Martinez. She's a tough lawyer with no sympathy for bad husbands or cheating spouses. But when she heard Emily's name, she immediately declined. She said if she took the case, her own husband would divorce her. They're devout Catholics with 5 kids and no Jonathan and Emily. Plus, she's already heard about Ethan." Victoria stood up. "Let me give it a shot." She dialed a number on her cell phone. "Hi, this is Victoria Hayes. May I speak to Logan Carter? Yes, it's regarding a divorce matter. Hi, Logan. I need to discuss a divorce case with you. Pause followed, and Victoria's face fell. Oh, you've already heard. Well, thanks anyway. She turned to Emily with a sigh. No luck, honey. I'm running out of options. Logan's already heard about what happened and said, frankly, you brought this on yourself. He also mentioned he wouldn't go up against Eric Marshall on this case for anything. Saturday morning dawned clear and cold, as expected for Boston this time of year. At 10 a.m., the kids sat in the living room with coffee, waiting for their mother to arrive. Emily finally walked in with her lawyer, Megan Calloway, in tow. Really, Emily? Bringing your lawyer here in front of the kids? Jonathan asked incredulously. My client doesn't want her character attacked in front of her children, Calloway said firmly. Your call, Jonathan replied, leaning back in his chair. The kids rushed over to their mom, full of questions. No questions for my client, Megan announced curtly. What? Who is this, Mom? Laura asked, confused. I'm Ms. Emily Hayes' attorney, Megan replied. Your father is filing for divorce. The truth was out. Jonathan stayed quiet, following Eric's advice to either tell the truth or say nothing at all. Looking back, it was good advice. Matthew spoke first. What's going on, Mom? Please direct all questions to me, the lawyer interjected. Mom, what's happening? Laura pressed. You can talk to me, young lady, Megan replied coolly. I'm your mother's spokesperson. That's when Matthew's fiancée, Kara, snapped. Shut up, lady, she said sharply. Needless to say, Megan was stunned. And who are you? She asked, her voice tight. Kara Sullivan, Matthew Hayes' fiancée, Kara said confidently. That makes me family. More than I can say for you. Things suddenly became very interesting. Apparently, Jonathan hadn't been told about the engagement, and even he hadn't realized how serious it was until he noticed the diamonds sparkling on Kara's left hand. Smiling, Jonathan stood up, hugged his soon-to-be daughter-in-law, then turned to his son and shook his hand. Congrats, son, he said warmly. Matthew grinned back. Watch it, old man. You know she's taken, he teased. Meanwhile, Emily looked completely stunned. Oh, my baby, she exclaimed, her voice trembling. Sorry, Mom, but you'll need to talk through your attorney, Matthew said firmly. Emily looked visibly emotional, choking back tears as Megan abruptly announced, I think we're done here. Standing as if ready to leave, that was the last straw for Jonathan. Sit down, Miss Calloway, he said firmly. This is a family meeting. You knew that when you came, and yet you still brought a lawyer. You can either stay quiet or leave. Either way, Emily's kids and I need to talk to her. Understood. The room fell silent. Reluctantly, Megan sat back down, looking visibly embarrassed. Other than today, I haven't told our kids anything yet. You're up first. Don't blow it, Jonathan said, shooting a warning glance at Emily's lawyer when she opened her mouth to speak. She quickly fell silent, flustered. Emily finally managed to say, Your father wants a divorce. Matthew looked at her with a hard expression. Why, Mom? She turned away, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know. Laura, Kara, and Matthew all turned their gaze to Jonathan, waiting for his side of the story. Jonathan took a deep breath and kept his composure. Really, Emily? This is how you're handling it? He asked. She started to cry, barely managing to get out. Your turn. Jonathan nodded and began. Fine. Your mother and I went to a children's charity gala last Friday. She ended up mingling with a man who offered her a weekend of so-called excitement, promising her experiences she'd never forget. This happened right on the ballroom balcony. Women who'd been targeted by him warned me about his intentions, but they left together, and she told me she was going home with him for the weekend. Jonathan paused for a moment, his voice steady. I feel terrible for not stepping in. She's an adult, and she can make her own choices, but I regret not standing up to him. I could have caused a scene, but I didn't. I feel ashamed and embarrassed. Your mother, however, went ahead with her choice, just as everyone predicted. I didn't hear from her until Sunday afternoon around 4:45, when she texted that she was on her way home. She got back around 5:25, and he dropped her off. His anger was rising. She walked up like nothing happened, but her keys didn't work because I changed the locks. I didn't want to risk her bringing him into our home. Emily interrupted. You sold my car. Jonathan shook his head. I already explained it was my car. I bought it. It was in my name. I gave you the money from the sale. I didn't just give it away like you gave yourself away. Emily started to fall apart, her mascara and eyeliner smudging as tears streamed down her face. Jonathan's voice softened for a moment, but his anger still lingered beneath the surface. But you know what hurt the most? He continued. She wore the diamond necklace I gave her for our 25th anniversary, along with her Christmas sapphire earrings, to the event. When she came home, she still had those on, along with her wedding and engagement rings. I took those back because we're no longer married. The engagement ring was my grandmother's. He paused, letting his words sink in before delivering the final blow. But you know what was missing? The one piece of jewelry she said meant the most to her. The one she loved, even though it was just a cheap replica. The one I promised to replace with a better version. The ring she always wore. Matthew and Laura exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Mom, Lady Diana's ring? Laura asked, her voice trembling. Emily broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. Yes, Lady Diana's ring, Jonathan said coldly. She lost it. And you know why? Please, Jonathan, stop, Emily pleaded. She gave it away, Jonathan said, his voice shaking with anger. She gave it away just like she gave herself away. The kids were stunned into silence, clinging to each other as Emily crumbled before them. Please stop, she sobbed. I'll sign everything. Just stop. Jonathan took a deep breath and steadied himself. So, I spent the weekend and the whole week sorting things out. I cried a lot. That's why there's nothing left now. Laura's voice broke through the tense silence. Daddy, can't you forgive her for one mistake? Matthew added, Yeah, Dad, it was just one time. Mom deserves better from you. Move on. Jonathan's composure cracked slightly as he felt a wave of frustration. Are you even listening to what we're discussing? He snapped. Do you know what she did? Let's go over it again. Tell me, Emily, did you have an inappropriate conversation with a man who wasn't your husband last Friday night? Emily hesitated. I talked to a nice guy. Another opportunity missed, Jonathan muttered, keeping his tone steady. Answer the question. She finally managed. Well, I suppose I might have. Another chance slipped away, Jonathan said, his frustration mounting. Did he tell you to inform your husband that you were going home with him for the night? Emily looked away. Yes, but I'm an adult, and Jonathan interrupted her, staying calm. Did you sleep with him? Because I wasn't there. She hesitated. I don't know. Then what did you do all weekend? Jonathan asked. Did you play games, recite poetry, write letters to the kids? Did you even think to call your husband? Her voice grew sharp as she snapped. Nothing but a fling. I refused to respond. I wanted it, so I did it, she admitted bluntly, her honesty cutting through the tension like a knife. Jonathan took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly. No, this isn't over, Emily. I'll have you questioned under oath about that weekend. Everyone will know if they don't already. And that woman who served you the papers? She's actually a lawyer. She volunteered because her family went through something similar. That's why she became an attorney. Emily finally realized the gravity of the situation. Her confidence was gone, and she broke down completely, facing Jonathan and their 3 children. I'll sign everything and give it to Eric today, she murmured. Megan Calloway intervened, shaking her head. I don't think that's in your best interest. You're fired, Emily said abruptly, her voice trembling. Megan, send your invoice to my office. I'll handle it. Jonathan felt a rush of satisfaction, as if he had just hit a home run. Emily stood up and walked toward the door, glancing back at her family. Goodbye, Jonathan. Kids, I'll call you tomorrow, and we'll meet up. The door clicked shut behind her. Megan stayed behind. Well, she said coldly, I hope you're happy. She's devastated. Get out of my house, Jonathan said sharply. Megan huffed, turned, and left. As the door slammed behind Megan, the backlash came almost immediately. Dad, how could you be so harsh to Mom? You treated her like that, Laura said, her voice filled with disbelief. What's wrong with you, Dad? Are you seriously divorcing Mom over this? Matthew added, his tone sharp. Jonathan took a deep breath, his emotions barely contained. Do you think I should just accept this? Is this what you both expect in your marriages? he asked, turning to Kara. She gasped, startled by his directness. I'd never do anything like that, Dad. It's wrong from every angle. Surely, Dad, you're not actually going through with this, Matthew said, his temper flaring. Matthew, it's decided. And if you can't support me on this, don't bother coming to any future events. Jonathan replied, holding his gaze steady, anger mirrored on both sides. Laura, still upset, chimed in. Dad, why were you so mean? Mom was so upset when she left. She's really hurting. You should forgive her and take her back. Jonathan was stunned. His kids were taking Emily's side despite everything. Finally, Kara spoke up, her voice clear. Dad, this might bother Matthew, but you're right. Mom didn't even acknowledge what she did wrong or apologize. Not that it would change anything, but at least some remorse would have been the decent thing. The room was thick with tension. About 2 hours later, Matthew and Laura called their mom and arranged to visit her. Jonathan handed Matthew a spare key and reminded him to drive safely. Matthew looked at him and asked, Do you want to come along? Are you kidding me? Jonathan replied, his voice raised. Matthew stared at him, clearly frustrated. I just don't understand you, he said before leaving. Meanwhile, Jonathan doubled down on his efforts against Ethan Marks. His allies seemed to be enjoying themselves while taking action. One of their moves was to switch Mark's license plate and then report his car as stolen anonymously. Jonathan was impressed by how easily they accessed Mark's vehicles, even though he kept both his Porsche and Range Rover in a garage. They also tailed him on the I-95 expressway, using a clever device to manipulate the car's computer, slowing down traffic and boxing him into the middle lane. When he tried to exit, they forced his Porsche into the barrier, causing heavy damage and landing him in the hospital for 10 days. His insurance premiums skyrocketed, and he lost his original coverage. Marks seemed to be experiencing the worst luck imaginable. When the police got involved, they didn't seem eager to investigate. They knew his reputation and turned a blind eye to his troubles, likely assuming that some angry husband was getting his revenge. That evening, Eric called to let Jonathan know that Emily had delivered the signed legal documents herself. He had a favorable judge lined up. The judge's son had been a victim of Marks 3 years ago, and the judge assured them he would fast-track both the divorce and the alienation of affection lawsuit. As for the adultery claim, it was uncertain how far they could take it, but it was worth trying. After the initial confrontation, Jonathan's kids became distant, with only Kara showing support for his decision. About a week later, Matthew and Laura returned to school, and the divorce process moved forward. When the final decree came through, Jonathan felt a wave of relief, just in time for the Cancer Society ball. Jonathan knew Marks would be there, and he was itching for some payback. At a coffee shop, one of his friends pitched an idea so clever that Jonathan had to see it himself. He called Natalie to ask if she'd be attending, and she mentioned she'd been invited but hadn't decided yet. Jonathan suggested she come. It would be worth it to witness some entertainment I have in mind, he said. The night of the Cancer Society ball arrived. Jonathan escorted Natalie to the event. After checking their coats, they mingled with acquaintances. It didn't take long for Jonathan to spot Ethan Marks prowling through the crowd like a predator, his eyes scanning for his next target. He soon zeroed in on a petite brunette with long hair, whose husband had just stepped away to the bar. Marks approached her, whispering something in her ear. She blushed and smiled faintly as he leaned in closer, brushing her arm and shoulder. Jonathan noticed one of Mark's associates positioning himself near the balcony doors while the other moved toward the woman's husband, engaging him in conversation. Marks whispered again, took the woman's hand, and began leading her toward the balcony. She followed, clearly charmed by his attention. Jonathan turned to Natalie. Now, he said. Natalie moved discreetly toward one of Mark's henchmen, while Jonathan intercepted the woman and Marks just as they reached the balcony. Excuse me, Jonathan said to the woman, catching her attention. You don't know me, but this man made similar advances toward my wife a few years ago. She gave in and spent the weekend with him. It destroyed our marriage. Marks froze, his confident expression replaced by a flash of panic. Jonathan pulled out a photo and handed it to the woman. It was of Emily's bruised face after a breakdown she'd suffered during the divorce proceedings. This is my wife, Jonathan said. She took her own life last year after the fallout. This man is the reason why. The woman's face turned pale as she stared at the photo. Her hand trembled as she dropped her champagne glass, the sound of it shattering drawing the attention of nearby guests. "This is your chance to avoid making the same mistake," Jonathan added calmly. The woman turned to Marks, fury replacing her initial infatuation. "You jerk!" she yelled, slapping him across the face. Her nails left red marks on his cheek. Marks stumbled back, clutching his face, as his bodyguard stepped forward to intervene. Natalie, however, calmly held her ground, blocking him. Jonathan walked past Marks, brushing his shoulder deliberately. "It's you," Marks hissed, his voice low and threatening. He reached for Jonathan's arm, but Jonathan turned sharply, delivering a swift punch to Marks' nose. There was a sickening crunch as Marks fell to the floor, blood pouring from his face. Gasps rippled through the crowd as cameras began flashing. The woman's husband, alerted by the commotion, rushed over and embraced his wife. "Take me home," she said, her voice trembling. He nodded, shooting a glare at Marks before leading her away. Jonathan stood over Marks, looking down at him with cold determination. "You ruined my life," he said quietly. "Now it's your turn." Marks' associates hesitated, unsure whether to step in. The event staff and security quickly intervened, escorting Marks out of the building as whispers filled the room. Jonathan turned to Natalie. "Let's go," he said. They left the gala and returned to Natalie's townhouse. The tension from the evening melted away as they shared a quiet drink together, discussing the events that had unfolded. Later, in a moment of vulnerability, Jonathan admitted, "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I took back some control." Natalie smiled softly. "You deserve that." The aftermath of the Cancer Society ball was swift and severe for Ethan Marks. While his actions weren't criminal, the public backlash was unforgiving. Photos of him bloodied and humiliated circulated online, accompanied by Jonathan's account of what had happened. Multiple charities returned Marks' donations, issued statements distancing themselves from him, and removed him from their boards. His reputation as a stockbroker crumbled. He lost his license and his clients, and soon after, his job. Marks attempted to sue Jonathan for assault and defamation, but the assistant district attorney, who happened to be the husband of the woman Marks had targeted at the ball, launched an investigation into Marks instead. With mounting legal fees and no income, Marks spiraled further into ruin. Just 2 weeks after being fired, he was found in an alley near an abandoned warehouse, beaten and mutilated. His injuries were brutal, and he became the subject of tabloid gossip and speculation. Meanwhile, Jonathan's life began to stabilize. His divorce from Emily was finalized, and though his children remained distant for a time, his relationship with Natalie grew stronger. They spent more time together, sharing quiet evenings and supporting each other as they healed from their respective traumas. Matthew and Laura eventually reached out, trying to rebuild their relationship with Jonathan. At first, their conversations were tense, but gradually, they softened. When Matthew married Kara a year later, he invited Jonathan to the wedding, though Emily was also on the guest list. Jonathan attended, determined to support his son, but avoided Emily entirely. The reception was uneventful until Emily, after a few too many glasses of wine, approached Jonathan. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tinged with desperation. "No," Jonathan said firmly, turning away. He left the reception early, sending a thoughtful note and a check as a wedding gift. In the months that followed, Jonathan continued to focus on his work and his relationship with Natalie. They attended events together, traveled occasionally, and found solace in each other's company. Though neither was ready to consider marriage, they embraced their bond and the stability it brought to their lives. 3 years later, on his grandson's 3rd birthday, Jonathan received an invitation to the celebration. Kara had made it clear that Emily wasn't welcome, which gave Jonathan the courage to attend. He arrived with a carefully chosen gift, a metal toy dump truck like the one he had loved as a child. The party was joyful, and for the first time in years, Jonathan felt at ease around his family. As the evening wound down, Jonathan sat quietly in the backyard, sipping a beer. The shadow of someone approaching made him look up. It was Emily holding a glass of wine. She looked older and more tired than he remembered. "Hello, Jonathan. Mind if I join you?" she asked cautiously. Jonathan sighed and gestured toward the seat across from him. "What do you want, Emily?" "I want to talk. To make things right," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything. But I'm lonely. I miss us. Can't we try again? Jonathan studied her for a long moment. Not just no, Emily. Hell no, he said firmly. You made your choices and I've made mine. It's over. Emily's face fell, and tears welled in her eyes. I thought you'd say that, she murmured. She stood up, brushed off her dress, and walked away without another word. Later that night, Jonathan reflected on the encounter. He felt no anger or resentment, only a quiet sense of closure. The chapter of his life with Emily was finally behind him. Months passed, and Jonathan fully embraced his new life. His relationship with Natalie continued to grow. They spent weekends exploring new places, hosting quiet dinners, and enjoying the simple comfort of each other's company. Though the scars of their pasts remained, they had found a way to heal together. Jonathan's professional life flourished as well. His investigative work exposing Ethan Marks' exploits earned the Northeast Times national recognition. The series of articles, accompanied by sworn statements from victims, sparked widespread conversation about accountability and consent in social and professional settings. Ethan Marks, once a name associated with power and prestige, had become a cautionary tale. Matthew and Laura reconnected with their father, though it was clear they still struggled with the fallout of their parents' divorce. Over time, their bond strengthened. Jonathan spent more time with his grandson, Ethan, who brought joy and light into his life. Watching his grandson grow gave him a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. On the 4th anniversary of the gala that had unraveled his marriage, Jonathan attended the annual charity event with Natalie. This time, he felt no bitterness, only a quiet satisfaction that he had reclaimed control of his life. The evening passed peacefully, filled with laughter and meaningful conversations. As Jonathan and Natalie left the event, she took his hand. You've come so far, she said softly. I'm proud of you. Jonathan smiled. We've come far, he corrected. Thank you for being by my side. They drove home in comfortable silence, the city lights twinkling around them. Jonathan reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and immense pain, but he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more resilient. Back at Natalie's townhouse, they shared a quiet toast to the future. Jonathan looked at her, feeling a sense of gratitude he hadn't known was possible. For the first time in a long time, I'm happy, he said. So am I, Natalie replied, smiling warmly. As they clinked glasses, Jonathan realized that while his past had shaped him, it no longer defined him. He was ready to embrace the next chapter, knowing he had found peace, love, and a future worth looking forward to. Thanks for watching. What would you do in this situation? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. See you next time.